One of the things we've become acutely conscious of over the past couple of months is the presence in our lives of the state, the powers of the state, what it can do, what it can forbid, and the various ways in which decisions which are taken by the state have a practical effect on our lives. And in recent months, for reasons which we all know only too well, the state has become increasingly interventionist, has passed a whole series of laws unprecedented in your life or mine, and made its presence felt in the day-to-day lives all of us are living. For the benefit of society, of course. For protection of the national health system, yes. In the interests of what is perceived by most people as the common good, yes. But whereas we took the state completely for granted for most of our lives, we were aware of its great and powerful apparatus. It paraded itself in front of our eyes on the occasion of the trooping of the colour, for example, royal weddings, the state opening of Parliament, and at election times we're aware of our participation too in the shaping of and the management, to some extent, of the policies of the state by the political parties which we return to Parliament. And so many will have reflected on the conflict of loyalties between the pursuit of and protection of public health, the maintenance of relationships between people from whom the COVID-19 regulations have alienated us for some time, by the practical education of our children, and all of these various things which we simply took completely for granted as being the wallpaper, if you like, of all our lives, suddenly now become issues for us. And above all, they raise the question for us of our relationship with society, our attitudes to those who govern us, our expectations of them, and the power, in fact, that we give them, not just to returning them to office, but through paying our taxes, through obeying the rules of the road, through being law-abiding, loyal citizens or subjects of Her Majesty, as is the case in the United Kingdom. And it reminds us, to some extent too, of a dual identity that all of us have. Because when we come into church, or when we think of matters of religion, we think of that other family to which we all belong, which has contributed to our identity right from the beginning, from the moment of our baptism. We are Christian. And our Christian and Catholic education, the practice of our faith, the people we mix with, our exposure to God's word, our participation in the life of the church, not least the sacramental life, all shape us and make us into the characters we are. And so sometimes there is a friction between our identity as Christians and Catholics and our identity as subjects of Her Majesty or citizens of whichever country we live in and belong to. And in fact, that has been an eternal theme in the history of the world, back in the Roman Empire as well, the conflict between religion and the state. Loyalty to the state in the time of the Roman Empire was synonymous with loyalty to the emperor, or the other way around. And it's important for us to remember, in understanding that probably one of the best known sayings of Jesus, which comes at the end of today's gospel, we have to think a little bit at the political context in which Jesus made that very, in a way, clever, slightly ambivalent, and nonetheless very clear distinction between the duties we have as citizens and the duties we have as children of God. Render unto Caesar, he said, the things that belong to Caesar, and to God the things that belong to God. And the whole history of the Christian church, certainly from the time of the Emperor Constantine right down to our own day, is to some extent about the management of and the living with that conflict of loyalties between our loyalty to the state, our patriotism in our country, and our membership of that family of disciples of Jesus, which we call the church. Whom do we obey? Whose laws govern our lives? What are our duties in regard to the church? And if they conflict, what are our duties with regard to the state? Do we have to obey all laws? Do we have to do what the state asks of us, or do what the church recommends to us in the light of the gospel message? And this question raised its head at the time of Constantine, the emperor's conversion to Christianity in the beginning of the 4th century. It was the huge conflict between the Holy Roman Empire and the papacy that led Henry II to come as a penitent to the mountain town of Canossa to ask pardon from Pope Gregory VII, one of the great epoch-making moments of medieval history. It was the great question at the time of the Protestant Reformation, where Martin Luther and many others articulated that belief in cuius regio eius religio. Whoever ruled the state decided on the religious profile. And in no country had it perhaps more tragic consequences than in England, with Henry VIII's break with the papacy. These are all incidental historical details which make, of course, the history of the church very colorful. But nonetheless, they do put the finger on an ongoing conflict of loyalties sometimes, but also a moment of moral decision for many people between the demands of the state and the claims articulated by the church that the gospel make of us. And at this particular moment in our history, as we live through the ongoing pandemic and the crisis in government, and not just the government of this country, but all governments across the world, in dealing with the economic and social consequences of this unprecedented health crisis, at least unprecedented in the lives of those of us who are on the planet at this moment. We had the Black Death in the past, of course. We had the Spanish flu in 1918, but they belong to the history books. We are dealing with it in the here and now. And what you want to do is to live by gospel values in the here and now. In fact, you've looked to the church for guidance and light and encouragement and help in negotiating the set of circumstances, tragic and challenging, which affect all of our lives, yours and mine. So that advice which Jesus gave to those Pharisees and followers of King Herod who tried to trap him, to catch him out, that clever answer he gave: give me a coin with which you pay your taxes, and I'll tell you who you're to be loyal to. Give to Caesar, give to the state that which properly belongs to the state, but also give to God what properly belongs to God. Now, there are many good and patriotic people who give their hearts to their country, to the well-being of their fellow citizens, and are loyal to the state and contribute to its running, and we salute them. But it's important to remember that for many of them, it is their Christian conviction, the gospel values which underpin everything they do, and their love of God, which actually also is at the root of their spirit of service to the state. And so in conclusion then, I feel that this pithy statement made by Jesus to get him out of a sticky wicket, to use a British expression, that was set for him by his adversaries, renders us great service in unlocking the Christian attitude to the crisis which has enveloped our world right now in 2020.